Hi, shalom, friends. Many schools have a custom that before the school year begins, the teachers meet in conference, and they actually exchange. Every teacher is given a list of the upcoming or the new students, and very often the teachers discuss amongst themselves the students. So, for example, third grade teacher might say to the fourth grade teacher that you should be watch out for this kid, or this kid needs that, or this kid needs this, and so on. And then, knowledge is very important. In one particular school, the fourth grade teacher refused to hear a report about the kids. When they asked him why, he would say, I want to see the children fresh. I don't want to be prejudiced. If the third grade teacher tells me that little Johnny is a troublemaker, and little Samantha gets distracted, and so on, already I'm going to be prejudiced against them. And I'm going to associate certain negative traits with each of these students. I don't know, maybe they've changed. And maybe I'll be a more effective communicator. So I'd rather not know, and I'll be able to form my own opinion. And though it was considered unusual, people respected very much his attitude. And then things changed. 4 or 5 years into this process, the fourth grade teacher, asked the third grade teacher, so tell me a little bit, who's the worst students that you have? So he looked at him in surprise and said, Bob, you always want to be uneducated about the students so you could make your own opinion, form your own opinion. Now you've changed? He said, no. Actually, I want to know, in your opinion, who's the troublemaker? So when I start the new year, I could show them more love. You see, I figure if you already formed a negative opinion about these students, probably they felt it. And therefore, when they're coming, they're not on a level playing field. Most of the students have had positive interactions with their teacher, but not these, in italics, troublemakers. I want to undo that. I want to love all of my students equally, and those that are deficient and have that lack of love from last year, I want to make it up to them. It's a beautiful story, because most of us, if someone tells you this person is a troublemaker and this person is a distracted person and this person never does their homework and so on, usually we would start our attitude with, okay, no leeway, I will clamp down, I will be strong, I will show strength, I will be determined, I will show no slack because he'll just take advantage, as I know from last year. So sometimes the foreknowledge might be very effective, but we often do it in the form of discipline. What makes this story so charming, which incidentally is a true story, is the fact that he wanted to take the troublemaker and not to be more careful about the troublemaker, but on the contrary, to show him an extra measure of concern and of sensitivity and understanding, and who knows, maybe that would be the most effective way to bring him back. The Holy Torah that we study has eternal lessons, and perhaps this week's Torah story actually emphasizes this particular method. It's a well-known story about a man, the second patriarch of Israel, with the second matriarch, Isaac and Rebekah, or in Hebrew, Yitzchak and Rivka, and they have twins. One of the twins, his name is Esav, or Esau in English, and one of them is Yaakov or Jacob. Esau, or Esav, he's a hunter. He not only hunts animals, but it's a tendency of his. He likes to trap people. He likes to entice people. He's a manipulator, actually. And his brother Jacob, Yaakov, is described as someone who's very, very wholesome, and to a certain extent, maybe the word innocent or naive would apply. What you see is what you get, and what you get is what you see. There's no duplicity at all. Very different people. And of course, when we're talking about a righteous family, the virtues of sincerity and honesty seem to be outstanding, especially in contrast to being the type of a hunter, a man of the field, a person that's involved with taking advantage of the superior over the inferior, the stronger over the weaker, etc. So we examine the story and we find something strange. We find that the father, Isaac, loves his son, not Jacob, though he was loved, but he shows extra love to his son Esau. He loved him very much. And what makes this strange is, it doesn't really say why he loved him. First, we're taught that Esau was this hunter type of a person, and then it says that he loved him because he was a hunter. Why would you love a son because he's a hunter when the most important thing in your life is to perpetuate the traditions of Abraham, which is a spiritual tradition? What makes it even more curiouser is that he was very, very much affected by his mother. In fact, when his mother dies, Isaac, who's an adult, refused to be consoled. It took many years until he got married that he became reconciled with the death of his mother. And his own mother showed a way of education, because when Isaac was young, he had a half-brother called Ishmael, and Ishmael was a man of the field. Ishmael was a person who was not Isaac-like, and therefore was an unhealthy and unwholesome attitude in the house. So Sarah had her husband, Abraham, send away Isaac's half-brother and said, this child cannot be with my child. So if there was someone who had already experienced a brother who was not necessarily following in the best traditions or the noblest traditions, it was Isaac. And how did you deal with such a kid? You send him away. And over here, the twins, one of the twins is certainly following in the path of Abraham. One is not, at least not overtly. And yet, what does Isaac do? He loves him and does not send him away. In fact, wants to give him a gift of a blessing. So how do we understand this? Amongst the numerous explanations is the following. In the case of Abraham and Sarah, Ishmael was a half-brother because he was the child of a Pelegesh, or what we would call a concubine, or a second wife. Being that Yishmael did not have both parents that Isaac had, so the response to Ishmael's behavior was different than the way Isaac would look at the son of a product of him and of Rebekah. Simply put, the relationship that the father had to Esau was stronger than the relationship that Abraham had to Ishmael. Because Abraham and Ishmael, he was the father, but with a different wife, a different mother. Whereas in the case of Esau, the father and the mother are the same. When it comes to what they call in Yiddish, Egen Mishpacha, when it comes to your own family, you don't send away a child. When a child is crying out for help, you help. When a child acts out, you listen, you respond. You don't necessarily tolerate or allow for bad behavior, but at the same time, you don't just run away from it. What does he want to do? Isaac wants to bring Esau back into the fold of his twin brother Jacob, not with the discipline, but with love. And not only with love that's concealed, but with a revealed love. He calls his son, who's in his 60s, and he says, "My dear son, I want to bless you." And of course, one would expect that a child, being the recipient of such a loving statement and the recipient of a loving father, would try to please him. Which leads us to today. Many of us know a fellow brother or sister who are not following in the traditions of Abraham. And some of us might come to the conclusion that the most valid way of interacting with these people is by not interacting at all, by keeping a physical distance. So if so-and-so is not keeping the dietary laws or keeping the Sabbath or marrying within the faith or something to that effect, or fasting on the Day of Atonement, perhaps the best thing is to send them away. We have nothing to do with such people. And indeed, there is precedent for that. That's perhaps Abraham and Sarah in terms of Ishmael. But you have to remember, Ishmael did not have Sarah as his mother. When we have Esau and Jacob, Esau is not following. At the end, he is not a fine individual. But they never follow the path of sending him away, of expelling him. Rather, what they do is they try to embrace him as much as spiritually and humanly possible. And friends, that is what we're supposed to do. If you see a fellow Jew who's not following in the traditions, it's because he was not brought up that way, or it's because he was not taught that way, or perhaps he wasn't privileged to have a good experience, a pleasant experience with Yiddishkeit. So you be that teacher who shows double love to the troublemaker, because the troublemaker experienced anger and despair from his previous teacher. He deserves a fair chance, and he needs an additional measure of concern and sensitivity. We have our work cut out for ourselves to be proper and good and spiritual and holy. And one of the ways that we will continue in our own spiritual growth will be to emulate the path of Isaac and Rebekah, and that is even in an Esav to find the aspect of a twin brother. Shalom.